just one servo. So the way that you would scale out on Modulus, you would probably host with something like compose.io and get an oplog enabled Mongo database, and then hook that up to your Modulus setup using environment variables. And then anytime you need to like handle more traffic, you just tell it to like just boot more servos. There's a little slider, and you go from 1 to 4, whatever you need, and then just hit apply, and it'll spin those up for you. It's pretty quick, and then they've got nice logs in there and that kind of stuff as well. So for me, like I host some of my apps at Modulus, some of them at Heroku, and some of them on DigitalOcean. So I can kind of speak to the differences once we get to the questions portion. Heroku is the other kind of easy hosting solution. The only thing that I would say is with Heroku, you use what they call build packs. So they have little containers as well, and they call them, gosh, what do they call those things? Dynos. And they're little containers that run your app as well. But they use Git to ship your code up there, and then if you're not using Rails, then you need to give them a build pack, which is essentially like a series of bash scripts that tell Heroku what needs to be installed in order to run your app. And so there's a large community effort, you can go out there and look, of Heroku Meteor build packs. But the latest one that seems to work with 1.0 is called like the horse build or something like that. I can find the link and put it up somewhere. But I've got an article that kind of compares all these, and I link to the horse build pack. But it does a good job. The gotcha here is that they don't do sticky sessions for their routing, so you can run into trouble because they're doing like login tracking, and that's all kind of dependent on the sticky session stuff. So if you scale to more than one, you may start to run into some weird issues. So it's great. You can host for free there for your first dyno. I think if you don't have a high traffic site, Heroku does a great job, and their add-on marketplace has a lot of options as far as the Meteor or the Mongo hosting. And I think by default, when you use the horse build pack, it installs the free Mongo hosting option for you. So the third option is just hosting it on your own, and there are numerous ways you could set that up. I mean, you could use Ansible or Docker or Chef or any of this stuff. But the easiest tool to get started with is Meteor Up. It's a package from Aeronota, and basically it's some scripts that you have that you can run. It uses SSH to like put your app over on the server, and so you do like Meteor Up, I think setup or something along those lines, and then once it's been set up, like it'll install Node, and it'll install, if you wanted to, you can tell it to install Mongo. Again, like I still use Compose for when I'm using Meteor Up because I want that oplog capability from them. And then once it's set up, you just say Meteor deploy, and it'll grab the current version that's in the folder, and it'll ship it up to the server for you, and deploy it, and then restart everything. So Meteor Up's taking care of the upstart scripts and installing everything, and then it's also your deploy command. And so you can use this with any hosting provider like Linode or DigitalOcean or Amazon EC2. So pretty basic option, but I think it probably gives you the most flexibility in the long run, is if you're hosting on your own, and then like you control the routing and that kind of stuff. So you can set up your own load balancer and make sure it's done the right way. All right, so the other part of this talk is scaling. I think the biggest piece for scaling when it comes to Meteor is Mongo itself. And in 0.7 they added oplog support, and basically what that is a fancy way to say that you're going to set up a Mongo replica, and you have a master server and you have a slave server, or primary and secondary, and the secondary servers listen to a special collection called oplog, and it's basically a list of data changes that are happening in the primary at any given time. And so those secondaries are listening to that and pulling it down and applying those changes. Well, Meteor has, with their oplog support, they just act like they're a secondary, and they listen to that oplog, and they sit there and they process all those data changes that are coming through on the Mongo server, and they're applying that. And so down on the server side of Meteor, they have what's called a merge box, which is the way that they're tracking what data the clients that are connected are interested in, and so they're able to look at the changes that are coming in, and then based on what's in the merge box, they can push that down to the client. So if you're subscribed to some data that's changed, they'll know you're subscribed, they'll see the change came, and they'll push it down the DDP pipe to you. And so that's kind of how you scale Mongo out. But the problem is, this is really kind of a double-edged sword. So the problem that oplog fixes is the fact that if you have more than one Meteor server in place, you're going to have update delays by default without oplog turned on, without the oplog support enabled. So what happens is, like, server A may run an update and send something to the database. It gets saved. Server A already knows that that data has changed, but server B doesn't have any way to know that it's changed. So what happens in regular Meteor without oplog is it's going to sit there and run what they call a pull and diff, and they're going to query the server and say, were there any changes on this data? And then they're going to see that the data changed, and it's going to ship back down to server B, and then any client that's connected that's subscribed to that data is then going to see that change. But that code was running like every 10 seconds, so you're getting a 10-second delay rather than full real time. So the way to get around that is to use oplog. So that's kind of what we were solving with the oplog change. But the issue there is, if you're pushing too much data into the Mongo server, there's no way to say, I only want to subscribe to this data from the oplog. It's all going to come down. So, like, if you're pushing a ton of data into Mongo, you may actually start to run into performance issues again, like CPU spike issues, where, like, it's sitting there and trying to process all those oplog changes, and it may not even care about all of them, but it still has to process through them all. So I've seen other people like Aaron Oda and Kadira. He's actually got two databases. He's got one that's sitting there. It's fronted by a Node API. The data comes in from the applications, goes into the first Mongo database. Then he runs aggregation queries and then pushes the aggregate data into the client-connected Mongo database. And so that's one way you could deal with having too much data being inserted into a Mongo database. So I touched a little bit on the merge box, but that's another place where you kind of have to worry about the scaling when it comes to CPU and memory. So the merge box kind of eats up the memory on the node side. So the more clients that you have running a subscription on a Meteor server, the more memory is going to be used. As far as I know. And then the thing to be concerned about with the CPU is, whether you're running pull and diff or are you running the oplog, how much is coming through, like I mentioned before, and then what kinds of things are you doing on the back end server side as well. So in particular, like I helped build a fantasyhub.com website that did real-time fantasy sports where you build a team, and when a game would become active on the server side, we were checking every minute to see if a game was active, and then once a game became active, we started pulling in the stats every 20 seconds for all the players in that game. And some of that stuff got a little CPU intensive, so that's another thing to kind of consider when you're writing your code. So that's kind of it for now. Does anyone have any questions?
As far as the experience you've had deploying on the different options, is there one that you have a personal preference for?
My personal preference would be Modulus probably first, and then DigitalOcean would be second. And I would say it just really depends on how comfortable you feel with running your own server. If you feel comfortable, I'd say go with DigitalOcean.
And you use Meteor up with that, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
I have a question now. If you are using Modulus, how long does it usually take before you